Does God exist? Because depending on the answer, it changes how we interpret reality, meaning, and truth. It's a question most people try to ignore, because if God exists, then all of creation isn't accidental. Reality itself was created with purpose. Science is incredible at explaining how the universe works, but when you ask a deeper question, how did the universe and the natural world begin? Science finds itself at a stopping point, having reached the limits of what it can explain. And this is only the beginning of what lies beyond its reach. In this video, we're going to look carefully at the evidence. As a doctor in physical therapy, I'm keen on investigating and understanding the evidence for every technique and treatment that I do. I have been trained to understand that a single study that finds a certain result doesn't have much merit at all. There needs to be substantial, compelling evidence that is congruent among multiple, well-made studies in order for it to catch my therapeutic attention. With that same ability to filter out the noise and identify what truly holds up under scrutiny, today I have compiled for you the most convincing evidence about God that left me unable to ignore his existence. If you've ever wrestled with your own doubts about God, my hope is that this video will help you see his creation, glory, and wonder from a new perspective. Because when we follow science all the way to the edge of what it can explain, we can begin to see the unmistakable fingerprints of God's hands integrated into all creation. First, we'll look at the biggest questions about the origins of energy and the universe. Next, we'll examine how and why living organisms actively resist entropy in a universe where physical systems naturally drift towards disorder. And finally, we'll look at DNA and its incredibly organized systems. And by the end of this video, something as simple as this just might change your perspective and doubts about God. Here are some of my favorite examples of God's creation that scream to me there has to be a creator. The origin of the universe and energy. Through the first law of thermodynamics, science teaches that energy cannot be created or destroyed. According to modern physics, space and time had a beginning. And when we trace that beginning backwards, we encounter a singularity, which is a boundary where physical laws no longer apply. The Big Bang describes that beginning, but it does not explain what caused it. And that's why the beginning of the universe is essentially the greatest miracle of all time. Because this isn't just the beginning of stars, planets, or galaxies. It's the beginning of everything physical within the universe. Time begins, space unfolds, matter and energy appear. And the laws of physics, the very rules science uses to understand reality, only make sense after time, space, matter, and energy come into existence. That leads to an unavoidable question. How and why did the universe begin? If the universe had a beginning, then the explanation for its origin cannot come from within the universe itself. Science can only study the natural world, and the natural world did not yet exist. So whatever caused the universe to begin was not natural. It existed outside of nature. And anything that exists and acts outside of the natural world is, by definition, supernatural. So when science asks, why does the universe exist at all? It has no tools to answer that question, because that question lies outside the physical governing laws of the system itself. It's simply the edge of what science was ever designed to explain. Stephen Hawking, one of the most profound atheistic cosmologists, said, "At the beginning of time, the laws of physics as we know them break down." He also mentioned that the question of what happened before the beginning of the universe is meaningless. And he said, it would be like asking what lies south of the South Pole. And I would have to agree with Stephen that asking what happened before the beginning of the universe is, in fact, meaningless. That is, within the scope and lens of science itself. Because science operates within space, time, matter, and physical law. But when you step outside of that scientific framework, the question doesn't vanish into the void of meaninglessness as Professor Stephen Hawking implies. It simply changes categories. It's no longer a scientific question. It becomes metaphysical, philosophical, and a spiritual one. Nobel Prize winner Charles H. Towns said, "In my view, the question of origin seems to be left unanswered if we explore from a scientific view alone. Thus, I believe there is a need for some religious or metaphysical explanation. I believe the concept of God and his existence. Logically, for me, it seems unequivocally evident that something beyond the natural world, something supernatural, had to cause this incomprehensible measure of energy, mass, and matter to begin. From the expansion of the universe down to the forces that bind every atom, reality itself behaves as though it's under intentional control, created and governed." Colossians 1:17 says, "He is before all things, and in him all things hold together." Isaiah 44:24 says, "I am the Lord, who made all things, who alone stretched out the heavens, who spread out the earth by myself." Section 2. Where did the drive to survive come from? One of the most compelling indicators of a creator is something so obvious we almost miss it. Every living thing fights to stay alive. According to the second law of thermodynamics, the natural direction of the universe is towards entropy, towards disorder and dispersed energy. That is, unless energy is constantly applied to maintain order. Stars burn out, metal rusts, mountains erode, and heat dissipates. Everything breaks down over time. That is the default direction of the universe. And yet, life pushes against the forces of entropy, which leads us to a bigger question. Where did this drive to overcome entropy and the will to live come from? From a scientific standpoint, this is astonishing. Where entropy pulls everything towards collapse, life organizes. Where disorder increases, life repairs. Where systems decay, life rebuilds. Right now, your body is performing millions of biochemical reactions every second, repairing DNA, replacing damaged cells, regulating temperature, fighting infection, producing energy, all to preserve order in a universe that is relentlessly pulling towards chaos. And this isn't just humans. A single bacterium does this. Plants do this. Animals do it. Every living system is locked in a constant, costly struggle to continue existing. Science does an incredible job explaining how this happens. Biology explains how cells are repaired. Chemistry explains all the reactions, but none of them can explain the deeper question. Where did the desire to live originate from? Survival of the fittest describes the outcomes of competition, not the origin of the will to compete. Matter on its own has no goals, no awareness, no intention. But the moment matter becomes alive, everything changes. Now it protects, now it repairs, now it adapts, now it strives. Life doesn't merely persist. It builds and maintains order from the molecular level all the way up to the fully functioning organisms. Outside of biology, the closest parallels we see to systems that maintain order, repair damage, and sustain purposeful function over time are found through modern human engineering. And examples like advanced robotics, self-correcting software, and automated flight control. And every one of those requires intelligent designers. Evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins writes, "Biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose." So the question that must be addressed is, if the universe naturally trends towards disorder, How does life constantly build and preserve order at all? And beyond that, why does life experience drive, intention, and purpose? These questions go beyond the limits of science and lead us to step outside of the scientific lens once again to understand the truth behind the answer. And for me, it clearly points beyond biology alone. Life fights entropy because its creator stands outside of entropy. Against the odds of the universe, he wrote that desire into every living thing. The origin of the will to live is not an accident. It's the signature of God. The Spirit of God has made me, and the breath of the Almighty gives me life. Job 33:4. The next design that still blows me away to this day is the molecular system of DNA. It's a literal coding system that contains detailed information that builds, operates, regulates, maintains, and repairs the entire organism. In other words, DNA functions as the programming language of life, complete with its own execution machinery and built-in maintenance system. The molecular system of DNA is like a self-replicating nano factory that contains its own blueprints, its own assembly line, its own error correction algorithms, its own security protocols and systems, and it creates its own machinery required to build and maintain itself. It's software plus the hardware that reads it, the machines that execute it, the tools that repair it, and the entire factory that keeps it running. DNA itself is one of the most compelling fingerprints of God as the ultimate creator, designer, and engineer. I'm sure God began to smile when humanity started to replicate his engineering brilliance through software and automation factories. Even one of the world's most advanced facilities, Fanuc's lights out robot factory, which can run for weeks without human interaction, doesn't even hold a candle to the operations of DNA. It cannot repair its own robots, rewrite its programs, manufacture a copy of itself, diagnose and correct its own design flaws, or replenish its own raw materials. So, we can look at an ordinary pair of scissors made of plastic, metal, and immediately recognize that this pair of scissors was designed and created by someone. So why can't we apply the same intuition when we look at something like APE1 or AP endonuclease 1, one of the most essential DNA scissors in human cells? Every single second you breathe, APE1 is working hard for you, cutting out damaged DNA bases so its system can rebuild the correct sequence. And without this one nano-sized pair of scissors, the cell's primary DNA repair system would completely collapse, leaving your genome unable to maintain its integrity. Not only does it cut out the bad sequences, it acts as a quality control inspector. It has damage detection sensors and is the leader of your cellular repair crew, all at the scale too small to see. A part of me thinks that God's engineering is so complete, so complex, and so far beyond anything we could ever recreate, that our human minds struggle to even conceive that a system like DNA could even be designed, simply because its sophistication eclipses anything humans can build or recreate. And DNA is just the beginning of the wonders of his creation. Your brain is like the ultimate biological supercomputer, running on just 20 watts of power, less than a light bulb. Bacterial flagellum functions like a microscopic rotary engine, complete with a propeller, a drive shaft, a flexible universal joint, and a reversible motor, and in some species, up to 100,000 RPM. There are countless examples of the brilliant engineer and design of God. It is simply amazing. Romans 1:19-20 says, "For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world, in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. There was a period in my college years when I doubted if there even was a God at all. It was a dark season of life where I felt a lot of struggle, doubt, and loneliness. I had multiple season-ending injuries with college football, feeling completely useless and fragile. I wasn't getting accepted into the graduate programs that I thought I was supposed to go to. I felt like I had been doing my best, trying to follow God's direction, but it didn't seem like anything was lining up. So I was forced to face the doubts about God myself. If you are struggling with whether God exists or not, I can tell you that you are not alone and that this is completely normal. It's uncomfortable at the time to truly take on your doubts, but facing doubt in your faith is like going to the gym and lifting weights. Avoiding it feels easier in the moment, but it guarantees weakness. Only resistance produces strength, and faith, like muscle, grows under load. But as C.S. Lewis said, if you look for truth, you may find comfort in the end. If you look for comfort, you will not get either comfort or truth, only soft soap and wishful thinking to begin with, and in the end, despair. If you learned something in this video, let me know in the comments. Has your perspective changed? Will you ever look at a pair of scissors the same? Now that we have made a compelling case for a creator, God, that brings up the next question. If there is a God, who is he? And what compelling evidence do we have to learn more about him? In my next video, we will address this very question.